Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to Iron Anchor Cycles. I know it's been a while since our last video, but we're ready to jump right back in where we left off, and I thought, what better place to start than with a brand new 2022 Road Glide ST. So, if you've been paying attention at all, the ST models, particularly the lowrider, but also the baggers, I think, are kind of all the craze right now in terms of Harley dealerships and new inventory. So we're excited to get one of these pretty early into the shop to start making some modifications on it. A little bit about this bike. I'm not going to go too crazy on it because I'm sure there's a million videos out there where you can find out about what makes these bikes unique. But my own personal take is I think they're awesome. They're really, really well set up from the factory with a couple of small changes. There are things you'd probably want to do to a Street Glide or Road Glide Special if the sport touring mindset is more where you're at versus the traditional touring setup. So some little changes that Harley made on these in terms of, air cleaner, the larger motor, the short bags, taller shocks, the removed lower valence on the rear fender, smaller front fender. All these things are super cool. And really, other than the motor, they're all just pretty bolt-on, sort of different parts that Harley had for different bikes that they kind of merged into this one. So while I don't think it's necessarily anything revolutionary, and I don't think that Harley would disagree with that, it's a really, really well set up bike from the factory. That said, there's always opportunity for us to make these better. And so this particular one, we're going to start in a place where I think a lot of people look to start on a Road Glide, and that is ditching these stock handlebars and getting a proper bar and riser setup on here. And for us, there's really only one way to go with that, and that's with Kraus's Road Glide Pro Kit. So we're going to do a top triple tree, we're going to do risers, we're going to do moto bars, gauge relocation, and get this bike looking and handling the way it should. So I'm going to jump in, we're going to start getting this bike taken apart, and we'll show you what this setup looks like. Little disclaimer, so we don't have to have any unfortunate comments about people complaining that I didn't give you a step-by-step walkthrough of how to do this. This video is not going to be a step-by-step walkthrough about how to install handlebars on a Road Glide. I think we've covered that before in different videos, and I'm sure there's also, again, a million different videos out there that show you how to take riser bolts off and remove some of these parts and things like that. So I'm basically just going to show you some of the really cool features of what we're doing, show you how it goes on, and point out a couple of things for you. Mostly really just want to give you some ideas of what you can do with your bike and some improvements you can make. So with that said, I'm going to jump in, we're going to get started, and we're going to get this bike all squared away. All right, so we're ready to get going on this, and like I said, the first step is going to be just doing some disassembly and getting all of our stock stuff out of the way. The true first step, however, that we already did is you're going to want to do the BCM flash to delete your ignition switch here in the center first. Obviously, once you get this all done, you won't be able to get the ignition switch back on, so it'll be much harder to turn on the bike and plug in the computer to do that flash. So bring it to a shop or whoever to get that BCM flash done before you start doing this if you're going to do it yourself, or make sure if you're bringing it to a shop to get it done that they can do the flash for you. So we did that, and I'm going to go ahead and just start the disassembly here, and we'll keep going. All right, so with our bars, wiring, and all the covers out of the way, obviously what we're down to now here is just the triple tree with the bottom part of the riser clamp still attached here. So last step here is just to loosen this up and slide it off. Get this tool out of the way. Go ahead and do this. All right, with those loosened up, the top clamp will just slide off. All right, there it is. So we're done with the disassembly. From this point, all this stuff is gonna stay right here, and we're gonna start to get our new parts ready, and we'll get everything installed. All right, so we've got all our parts disassembled. We're over at the workbench. We're gonna start getting the new bars and risers wired up and put together, and then we're gonna go ahead and get it all back on the bike. But before I do that, just wanted to show you some of the parts we're gonna be using and do a little comparison here. So obviously, this is the stock top triple tree, along with the riser clamp and ignition switch that all came off the bike. And this is the Kraus top triple tree that we're gonna replace this with. Now, you might ask, why would you do that? There's a couple of reasons. Number one, just aesthetics. This is all covered by the factory nacelle, so these are ugly, in the case of the top triple tree, just, you know, cast steel parts. This is a really nice billet aluminum piece that's gonna look a lot nicer when it's exposed without that gauge nacelle on there. The other thing is, and it's hard to notice this until you got them both in your hands, but this is tremendously heavy. This, not super, super light, because it's still, you know, aluminum and not plastic or something like that, obviously. But there's a tremendous weight difference in these two parts. My right arm is actually starting to hurt a little bit holding this. Not the case over here. So that's the triple tree. In addition to those benefits, weight and aesthetics, this is a stronger, better made piece. If you remember from when we took the bike apart, there was 3 bolts that we did. Well, this one has twice as many. So in each clamping location on each of the legs, you got 2 bolts instead of 1. Same thing on the steering head. You've got 2 bolts here instead of 1. So this is gonna be a stronger piece. It's gonna work better. It's gonna look better. A really nice addition to the T-bar setup. Beyond that, this is all stuff that I think we've shown before. Hopefully you've seen in other places. We've got our riser. I'm not gonna get into the details on why this is great. I know I've done that before, so check out some other videos if you wanna see why these are our favorite risers. You've got the new gauge housing, and this is super, super cool, and I mean, fairly unique to the Kraus setup. There's a lot of different manufacturers making gauge relocations for road glides now. I happen to appreciate that Kraus was first, so I like that. I also think that nobody's really done it as well as they have. I think the thing that makes these so great, in addition to how it looks with this really nice billet aluminum housing, is you have, if I can find it here, the clamp that goes onto the bars, as well as a little arm that goes in between the gauges and the clamp. So what this means is that this gauge bracket can basically be put anywhere. It can go in front of the bars, it can go behind the bars, you can move it up, you can move it down, you can tilt it, you can move it closer or further away from the bars, and you can get it exactly where you want it. So for you and your height and your bars and your bike, you can see the gauges exactly where you want to see them. And on a road glide, it's really not that hard to get this set up so that you can see both your gauges and your infotainment, and none of it is blocked by the handlebars when you use this setup. So it's really, really, really well thought out, and the functionality of it is tremendous. So last piece, I mean, you've got riser bushings and some other little things, in addition to our handlebars. Kraus has a set of handlebar perch clamps here, and these are going to replace those large ones with the pins in them that go on the stock bars on a road glide. Obviously, those aren't going to go back on with the new bars we've got, so Kraus has thought of that and includes a set of these. So those are all of our parts. At this point, what I'm going to do is get our wiring run into the bars. Not going to show you that. It's very, very simple on moto bars. Just pull it through, and we'll start to get the parts assembled and get it back on the bike. All right, so we've got our bars assembled to the risers and risers assembled onto the top triple tree, and everything is bolted now onto the bike. So do it like this without getting any of the wiring done so we can make sure everything is straight, adjusted the way we want it. Obviously the wiring is in, but the grips aren't on, or the clamshells or any of that stuff. So this is in, adjusted, and tightened down. And now the next step is gonna be, obviously we've got our harness coming out of the bottom of the riser, and then we've got to just connect that back to the bike side, and then clean up the wiring here and tuck it all out of the way so it's nice and clean. We'll get a better shot of this later, but hopefully from this angle you can see as well too how nice that Kraus top triple tree looks on there. Just makes it look clean and finished. Obviously the only thing left that doesn't look perfect would be the tops of the fork tubes. These are the caps, and this is the original suspension. On this particular bike down the road, going to wind up doing Olin's cartridges, so you'll have a nice clean finished top on those, so that'll just complete the look and make it look as it should. So what I'm going to do now is just get all these connections made, test everything to make sure it's working properly, and then we'll go ahead and continue to do the button up here and get the gauges back installed, which will be the last step. All right, so here's the bar setup, all put back together, buttoned up, and ready to go. I'm sorry I didn't really have any footage of doing any part of the installation here. Really, I kind of meant to do that. I know I said it wasn't going to be a how-to. I was hoping I'd show you a little bit about how it goes together, but to be honest, it just goes so quickly and it's so easy to do. I just really couldn't think of a good point to do it, and then honestly, I just got everything put together and realized that we hadn't shot anything. So apologies for that, but in any event, we'll talk a little bit about what we've got, and I'll zoom in so you can kind of see this in a little bit more detail, which hopefully will be helpful. So basically, all the parts we talked about, we've got our risers, bars, gauges here, original, obviously switches, levers, all that. The Kraus clamps here on the bar to replace those large Road Glide ones, and then a new set of grips to go along with doing this rather than trying to cut off the old Harley ones. Mirrors are original. We are using the original clutch cable and brake line, and then we've extended the wiring on the switches and as also on the gauges. So all those kits are available. We sell them on our website. Sure you can get them from anywhere too, to extend your wiring to make it really easy. Doing the internal wiring on these modular, two-piece bar riser setups is super simple because you're not really pulling anything any great distance. You're just putting the wires in here and pulling them out in the middle. And then in this case, I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera, but it's pretty well hidden, the wires running down between the trees. And then the bracket for the gauges actually pulls them forward a little bit and out of the way so you can't see them. So it's really clean and really easy to do. And then all the original wiring and plugs and all that stuff, you just carefully, we tuck that in so that you really don't see anything up here that is not good to look at. So this really is a very clean, really, really nice setup when it's all said and done. One thing I'll point out here, obviously I mentioned we used these risers and then this Kraus triple tree. The one part that's not on this bike that we do typically do is we do use a pullback plate normally. So Kraus has two versions. There's the Raptor and the T-Rex. The one for the Road Glide, which I'm going to get it backwards, I believe it's the Raptor, is open in the middle so that it will come around the little fork lock here so you can still get in there and use it. Not the OE fork lock, mind you, but just the one that's on their triple tree. I personally really like using a pullback plate. So basically, obviously what that's going to do is, like its name sounds, it's going to take your whole setup and it's going to move it back about 2 inches. And I personally like that bars closer to the rider position, but in addition, it gives you more room in between your nav, your infotainment, I should say, and your risers. So there's more room and more options in terms of manipulating the gauges so that you can find the perfect spot so that nothing's blocked and everything's where you want it. Still works this way. You're just gonna have to make a little bit of compromise between what you wanna see more of, the infotainment or the gauges. So that's just worth pointing out. I'll try and give you a view from sort of on the bike so you can see it as well, but I think the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna grab the camera here and we'll zoom in a little bit and take a look at some of the details, which hopefully will, help you to see if you want to put it on your bike and maybe help with an install too if you decide to do it. All right, so here's a bit of a closer view of the setup from the left side of the bike. What I wanted to show here was really just how clean this all looks. So what you have here is your ABS lines for the brakes. That's not really connected to anything here. It just sort of loops up and over. That's sort of always been there. You've got your wires here that run down from that's actually your brake line for the master cylinder. Then you have your wires on this side and this side that are coming down through the risers and go into the neck of the bike where they connect to the main harness. But obviously, as you can see, it's really clean and there's nothing sort of, that looks unfinished or anything like that. You can also see, hopefully at this angle, there's really not a ton of space to work with here, front to back, in terms of moving the gauges around. So this works really well, and you do have the flexibility of, as I mentioned before, up, down, forwards, backwards, changing the angles, all that. There's just not quite as much room to change the position as if you had taken the pullback plate and moved everything back a little bit. So obviously, you can see here, we get lock to lock on the bars. That's one thing you definitely want to check when you're doing this to make sure that nothing's catching or hanging up. particularly if you rerouted cables or lines or anything like that. You want to make sure that nothing is going to snag or pull or anything like that. The other thing we'll do is with a mechanical clutch like this, once we get the bike back on the ground, we'll just check and make sure it's still adjusted properly and that by changing the routing of it and the angles, it didn't create any sort of additional tension on it so that it's not adjusted properly. So from here, we're just going to get the bike down. I'll show you the angle a little bit more once we get it on the ground, and we'll go from there. All right, so here we have it. All back together, sitting on the ground and ready to go. Super clean install, and more importantly than that, super functional setup. Said it before about doing T-bars on other baggers. It is tremendous how this changes the way a Road Glide rides. And I can't overstate that enough, and the only thing I can say is if you haven't tried it, you have to try it in order to really realize how much of a difference this makes. So I'll just hop on so you can get a sense of what this looks like. We get that in view there. Yeah, it's pretty good. So just to give you an idea of proportions and heights and sizes and things like that, the seat we're on is an SDC Pro seat from Saddlemen, similar in height to a Step Up, although a little bit further back. I'm 6'1", and this is the position that we get using Kraus's Triple Tree. These are 12-inch risers, so that is the entire height, the legs, the kickback, everything. So 12-inch in the riser, 2.5 in the bar, so 14.5 inches of total rise. And we've obviously got the kickback riser that has some pullback in it, but we're using no pullback plate, as I mentioned. So it's a great position. Like I said, my personal feeling, I prefer the kickback a little bit, both in terms of the riding position, but also in terms of getting the gauges set up. But hopefully this helps you in terms of figuring out proportions if you're thinking about getting one of these. But as I said, super clean, super nice setup, and really easy to install, actually. You know, if you've ever installed any other kind of bars, despite the fact that there's a lot of moving pieces here, it's really not that difficult to do. So I'm gonna leave it there, and we're gonna go take Mike's bike for a ride and see how it goes.